The red dust of the borderlands did not just sit on the skin, it bit into it. It was the summer of 1873, a season that felt less like a passage of time and more like a punishment from the sun. Here, where the rough edge of Texas scraped against the vast emptiness of New Mexico, the heat was a living thing. It shimmered in waves off the hard-packed earth, distorting the horizon until the distant mesas looked like they were melting into the sky. Tsehani rode through this furnace with the ease of a man who had long ago made a truce with the elements. He did not fight the heat. He moved within it. The people of the settlement called San Miguel Crossing knew him as Hawk. It was a name that rolled off their tongues easier than the sharp, guttural sounds of his Comanche birth name, which meant the hawk that walks alone. The name suited him. He was a creature of solitude, drifting high above the conflicts that scarred the land below, watching, always watching, but rarely touching the ground long enough to be trapped. His horse, a sturdy Appaloosa with a coat like spilled ink on snow, huffed softly, shaking its mane against the flies. Hawk reached forward, his hand resting on the animal's damp neck. "Easy, brother," he murmured in the tongue of his fathers. "Water soon." He was a man caught between two dying suns. He wore the buckskin leggings of the Nermernu, the people, soft and worn by years of riding. But his shirt was cotton, bought from a trader in Santa Fe, stained with sweat and dust. Around his neck, hidden beneath the fabric, lay a simple leather thong holding a single, polished stone, a memory of a mother who had died before the reservations could claim her spirit. It was his anchor. Without it, he feared he might simply dissolve into the wind, belonging nowhere. The war was supposed to be over, or so the papers in the cities said. The treaties had been signed with ink that never seemed to dry before it was broken. But out here, the war never truly ended. It just changed shape. It shifted from arrows and cavalry charges to fences, railroads, and starvation. Hawk had chosen not to starve. He had chosen not to surrender to the slow death of the reservation agencies. Instead, he lived in the gray space a scout when the army paid silver, a hunter when the deer were plentiful, and a ghost when neither was true. He lived in a small shack made of river willows and mud, hidden in a draw near the Pecos River, far enough from town to be ignored, close enough to trade. But today, the solitude that usually wrapped around him like a comforting blanket felt thin, threadbare. He checked the Winchester rifle in the scabbard by his knee. He had 7 bullets left. 7. It was a number that made his skin prickle. In the old days, a quiver would be full, and the buffalo would be endless. Now, he counted brass casings like a miser counted gold coins. His stomach tightened, not just from hunger, but from a deeper hollow he refused to name. It was loneliness. It hit him hardest on nights when the moon was full and the land was silver and silent. He missed the sound of the drums. He missed the laughter of women stretching hides, the boasts of young men around the fire. But he did not miss the despair that had taken their place in the camps. He had walked away from that. And in doing so, he had walked away from his people, to the Comanche. He was a man who walked too close to the white man's road, to the white man. He was just a savage who sat a horse better than they did. He pulled his hat lower. San Miguel Crossing was rising out of the dust ahead. The town was an ugly scar on the beautiful land, a collection of timber and adobe huddled near the river crossing. It was growing, fueled by rumors of the iron road, the railroad that was inching its way west. Even from here, miles out, Hawk could smell it. It smelled of unwashed bodies, coal smoke, frying grease, and fear. It was a necessary evil. His flour sack was empty. His coffee tin held only dust. And the Appaloosa had thrown a shoe 3 days ago on the rocky shale of the canyon. He could not risk his horse's leg. He had to go in. He urged the horse into a trot. The rhythm was familiar, a soothing beat against the chaos of his thoughts. He remembered the rumors he had heard from a trapper 2 weeks ago. Silas Calder was buying land. The name Silas Calder was spoken in whispers, like the name of a sickness. He was a cattle baron, a man who saw the world not as earth and sky, but as profit and loss. He was not in San Miguel often. preferring his grand hacienda closer to the capital, but his shadow was long and cold. It lay over the sheriff's office, over the bank, and over the valleys where the water ran deep. Hawk knew men like Calder. He had seen them sign papers with smiles on their faces while their soldiers burned winter food stores. "Stay out of it," Hawk told himself, the English words feeling foreign and heavy on his tongue. "Get the coffee. Get the iron for the hoof. Ride out." He had no quarrel with Calder. He had no quarrel with anyone, as long as they left him to the wind and the river. He was a man of business today. Nothing more. As he crossed the invisible line where the open range became the town's outskirts, the atmosphere shifted. The air grew thick. A wagon rolled past him, laden with timber. The driver, a bearded man with eyes hard as flint, spat a stream of brown tobacco juice into the dust near Hawk's horse. Hawk did not flinch. He did not look at the man. He kept his eyes on the horizon of rooftops, his face a mask of indifference carved from mahogany. San Miguel Crossing was busy. It was the middle of the week, yet the street was cluttered with horses and wagons. The railroad camp to the east had brought money, and money brought trouble. There were soldiers in dusty blue uniforms standing on the porch of the saloon, their laughter loud and jagged. There were vaqueros with silver spurs that jingled like warning bells. There were freedmen working the livery stable, their muscles shining with sweat in the merciless sun. And there was the flag. The stars and stripes hung limp on a pole outside the marshal's office, bleached pale by the relentless sun. It was the symbol of the new law, a law that said a piece of paper meant more than generations of blood spilled on the soil. Hawk rode down the main street. He felt the eyes on him. They always looked, "There goes the Indian. Watch your pockets. Watch your women. Why isn't he on the reservation?" He could hear their thoughts as clearly as if they shouted them. He kept his back straight, his shoulders relaxed. A predator did not show fear, and he did not show aggression unless he intended to strike. He was simply present, a fact of the landscape they could not quite erase. He guided the Appaloosa toward the blacksmith's shed at the far end of town. The rhythmic clanging of a hammer on an anvil rang out, a sound of industry that clashed with the cicadas singing in the brush. The blacksmith was a giant of a man named Swedish Olaf. He was one of the few who looked at Hawk and saw a customer. Not a threat. Money, to Olaf, had no color. Hawk dismounted in one fluid motion, his moccasins making no sound on the dirt. He patted the Appaloosa's neck and tied the reins to the hitching rail. "Hoof needs iron," Hawk said as Olaf stepped out, wiping soot from his forehead with a rag that was blacker than his skin. Olaf nodded, squinting against the glare. "Left hind. I see. You've been riding on a rock." "Hawk." "The canyon," Hawk replied. His English was clipped, efficient. He did not waste words. Words were like water in the desert, precious, not to be spilled without reason. "I can have him ready in 2 hours, Olaf said. "Cost you 50 cents. 50 cents. It was a high price, higher than last winter. The railroad brought inflation along with the coal smoke. Hawk reached into the pouch at his belt and produced a silver coin. He placed it in Olaf's massive palm. 2 hours, Hawk agreed. He turned and walked back toward the center of town. He walked with a distinctive gait, the walk of a man used to the rolling motion of a horse, but silent, his weight shifting onto the balls of his feet. He was armed, of course. A hunting knife with a bone handle sat at his hip. The Winchester was now crooked in his arm, barrel pointing at the sky. In San Miguel, a man without a gun was a man asking to be a victim, and an Indian without a gun was a dead man. He needed supplies. The general store was the largest building in town, a 2-story structure with a false front that boasted signs for everything from patent medicine to farm plows. As he walked, he passed the saloon. The smell of stale beer and sawdust wafted out. A piano was playing a tinny, cheerful tune that seemed grotesquely out of place in the crushing heat. He saw Sheriff Briggs standing by the door, thumbs hooked in his gun belt. Briggs was a man whose belly had grown faster than his conscience. He had a face like a bulldog, and eyes that were always calculating the odds. He watched Hawk approach, his gaze dropping to the rifle, then back to Hawk's face. "Hawk," Briggs grunted. It wasn't a greeting. It was an acknowledgement of presence, like noticing a storm cloud on the horizon. "Sheriff," Hawk replied, not stopping. "Don't cause no trouble today," Briggs called out to his back. "Town's edgy. Calder's foreman is with a crew. They're celebrating." Hawk did not turn around. "I buy my goods." "I'm going." "See what you do," Briggs said. Hawk felt the heat of the sheriff's stare between his shoulder blades until he rounded the corner. Silas Calder's foreman. That would be Buck Crowley, a man who enjoyed herding things: dogs, horses, people. Hawk had crossed paths with Crowley once, a year ago, over a dispute regarding a deer carcass. Crowley had backed down then because he was alone, but with a crew, Crowley would be brave. Hawk pushed the thought away. He would get his coffee, his salt, and his flour. He would check the post office for the letter that never came, a foolish hope that perhaps his brother, who had been taken by the schools in the East, might write. And then he would leave. He stepped onto the wooden boardwalk, the planks creaking under his weight. The shade of the overhang offered a momentary relief from the sun, but the air was still stifling. He looked at his reflection in the glass of the store window. A dark face, angular and sharp, framed by black hair that hung long and loose, eyes that were the color of obsidian, hard and unreadable. He looked wild. He knew. He looked like the enemy they told their children stories about to scare them into obedience. Inside him, the conflict churned. He wanted to be back by the river, stripping the bark from a willow branch, listening to the water, but he also wanted something else. He wanted to look at a woman and not see fear. He wanted to sit at a table and not be the outsider. He wanted to belong. Yet he despised the very world that refused to let him in. He was the freedom of the West, they said, the romantic image of the vanishing noble warrior. But there was nothing romantic about disappearing. There was only the silence and the dust and the slow erasure of a way of life. He pushed the door to the general store open. A bell jingled overhead, a cheerful sound that announced the intruder. The store was dim and smelled of spices, leather, and dry goods. Several customers looked up. A woman in a calico dress pulled her child closer to her skirts. Two men near the counter stopped talking mid-sentence. Hawk ignored them. He moved to the shelves. His movements precise. He chose a sack of flour, checking for weevils. He found a tin of coffee Arbuckles, the brand with the peppermint stick inside, though he cared little for the candy. He took a small bag of salt. The shopkeeper, a balding man named Mr. Abernathy, watched him from behind the counter. Abernathy was fair, usually. He took Hawk's money without complaint, though he never offered the credit he gave to the white ranchers. "That's all." "Hawk?" Abernathy asked, his voice tight. "And a box of 4440 cartridges," Hawk said. Abernathy hesitated. "Ammo is short this week. The supply train was delayed." "I see boxes on the shelf," Hawk said, pointing. "Those are reserved for Mr. Calder's men." Hawk looked at the shopkeeper. The silence stretched, heavy and dangerous. He could argue. He could point out that his silver was as good as Calder's notes. But he saw the fear in Abernathy's eyes. It wasn't fear of Hawk. It was fear of the man who owned the town. "One box," Hawk said softly. "I need to hunt." Abernathy glanced at the door, then quickly reached under the counter and pulled out a half-full box of ammunition. He slid it across the wood, covering it with his hand. "Take it. Just pay and go." Hawk placed the money on the counter. He did not say thank you. Gratitude was for gifts. This was a transaction, and a reluctant one at that. He gathered his supplies, the weight of the flour sack familiar on his shoulder. He stepped back out into the blinding afternoon light. The heat hit him again, a physical blow. He had an hour to kill before the horse was ready. He could go down to the river, sit in the shade of the cottonwoods. That would be the wise thing to do. The safe thing. But as he walked down the boardwalk, avoiding the gaze of a group of miners, he felt a strange pull. It was an uneasiness, a prickling at the base of his neck that usually warned him of a cougar in the brush or a storm brewing over the peaks. The town felt brittle, like dry tinder waiting for a spark. The tension regarding the railroad, the land disputes, the racial hatred, it was all woven together into a tight knot. Silas Calder was squeezing this place, wringing the profit out of it, and everyone was afraid, and fear made men dangerous. Hawk stopped at the corner of the street. To his left was the path to the river. To his right, the bakery. The smell hit him then. It was not the smell of the railroad or the horses. It was something sweet, warm, and achingly domestic. Yeast, butter, rising dough. It was the smell of bread, fresh from the oven. It cut through the dust and the manure, a scent so pure and simple it stopped him in his tracks. It reminded him of something he couldn't quite place, perhaps a memory of the mission school he had run away from as a boy, or perhaps just the universal hunger of a man who lived on dried venison and hardtack. He hadn't intended to buy bread. It was a luxury. But the smell was a siren song. He turned toward the bakery. It was a small building, run by a German family. He had bought from them once before. The woman had big hands and a loud voice, but her bread was good. He did not know that his life was about to pivot. He did not know that the universe, in its strange and cruel humor, had lined up the stars over San Miguel Crossing on this specific sweltering Tuesday. He thought he was just a Comanche warrior buying supplies to survive another week of loneliness. He did not know that the hunger in his belly was about to meet a hunger much deeper and much more desperate. He shifted the flour sack on his shoulder, his moccasins silent on the wood, and stepped around the corner toward the smell of the bread. The sun beat down on his back, the red dust swirled around his ankles, and the lonely wind of the Texas borderlands pushed him forward, toward a destiny he had spent a lifetime trying to outrun. The town of San Miguel Crossing held its breath, waiting for the spark, and Hawk, the man who wanted no part of their fire, was walking straight into the flame. The aroma of the bakery was a cruel deception. It floated out into the street, a sweet, yeasty invitation that promised warmth and family dinners, clashing violently with the reality of San Miguel Crossing. The street smelled of horse manure, unwashed bodies, and the metallic tang of the railroad. But that singular ribbon of scent, freshly baked sourdough and glazed rolls cut through it all. It was the smell of a life Hawk had never known, and one he was certain he never would. He had tied the Appaloosa at the hitching rail near the general store, his saddlebags heavier with the few supplies he had purchased. The coffee tin rattled against the salt pork. He should have mounted up. He should have turned the horse's head toward the river and the safety of the open range. The sun was already leaning toward the west, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange. The town felt like a trap waiting for spring, but the smell held him. It drew him down the boardwalk toward the small structure at the end of the row, a building with peeling white paint and a sign that swung lazily in the hot wind. As he rounded the corner, the source of the smell was replaced by a sound. It was a harsh, grating shout, the kind used to drive away a stray dog. "Get out, go on, we have nothing for the likes of you." The door of the bakery flew open, banging against the outer wall. A woman stumbled out, or perhaps she was pushed. Her momentum carried her to the edge of the boardwalk where she caught her balance against a wooden post to keep from falling into the red dirt. Hawk stopped. He stood in the shadow of the overhang, his hand instinctively brushing the handle of the knife at his belt. Though there was no weapon drawn against him, he was merely a witness, invisible in his stillness. The figure clinging to the post was a woman, but she looked like a phantom that had been dragged through the brush. She was wearing a wedding dress. It was a gown of expensive white silk and lace, the kind imported from the East, fitted with a bodice that was meant to showcase beauty and wealth. Now, it was a ruin. The hem was black with mud and torn in jagged strips. The delicate lace at the sleeves was shredded. There was no veil, only a mass of golden brown hair that had come loose from its pins, tangling around a face that was pale with exhaustion. She was barefoot. Her feet were small, white, and bleeding. A stout woman in a flour-dusted apron stood in the doorway of the bakery, brandishing a broom like a weapon. This was Frau Muller. Hawk knew her by sight. She was a woman who went to church every Sunday and sang hymns about charity. Yet now her face was twisted in a snarl of self-righteous fury. "Begging you dare come here begging," Frau Muller shouted, her voice shrill enough to draw the attention of the men loitering at the saloon across the street. "You shame this town, running off like a thief, leaving a good man like Mr. Calder at the altar." The young woman in the wedding dress did not shout back. She did not weep. She gripped the rough wood of the post, her knuckles white. She was trembling, a fine vibration that ran through her entire frame, born of hunger and fatigue, but her head was high. She looked at the baker with eyes that were dark and burning, refusing to look down. "I only asked for the stale ends," the woman said. Her voice was low, hoarse from thirst, but it carried a steel that surprised Hawk. "Bread you would throw to the hogs? The hogs are honest creatures," Frau Muller spat. "They do not break contracts. Get away. You ruin thing before I call the sheriff," with a final, contemptuous sweep of her broom. The baker slammed the door shut. The lock clicked with a sound of finality. The woman in the white dress sagged. The defiance drained out of her shoulders, leaving only the frailty of a body pushed past its limit. She looked at the closed door, then down at the empty street. Her hand went to her stomach, a reflexive gesture of pain. She spotted a crust of bread near the edge of the trash barrel, a piece dusty and hard, likely dropped hours ago. She hesitated, her hunger warring with her dignity. Hawk watched her reach for it. Something inside him snapped. It was not a loud noise. It was the quiet breaking of the rule he had set for himself that morning. Do not get involved. He stepped out of the shadows. The boards creaked under his moccasins. The woman froze. She snatched her hand back from the trash, her eyes darting to him. When she saw him, a tall Comanche warrior with long black hair, skin the color of polished copper, and a face that looked as if it had been chiseled from the canyon walls, she gasped. She pressed her back against the wall of the bakery, her eyes wide. Fear was there. Yes, he was used to fear, but beneath the fear, he saw something else. Curiosity, desperation. He did not look at her. He walked past her, the fringe of his leggings brushing against the ruined silk of her dress. He reached the door of the bakery and opened it, the bell jingling cheerfully, a perverse counterpoint to the scene outside. Inside. The air was hot and thick with the scent of yeast. Frau Muller was behind the counter, wiping her hands on a rag. When she saw Hawk, her face hardened again, though the aggression was replaced by a cold, wary commerce. She did not like Indians, but she liked their silver well enough. "We are closing," she said abruptly. Hawk did not speak. He walked to the counter. In the glass case, there was a single loaf of white bread, fresh and golden, the crust perfectly browned. It sat on a doily, a prize. He reached into the pouch at his belt. He had $1 silver left. It was meant for a bottle of whiskey, the cheap firewater that helped him sleep when the memories of the dead became too loud. He placed the silver dollar on the counter. The metal rang against the wood. "The bread," Hawk said. His voice was deep, resonant, filling the small space. Frau Muller looked at the coin, then at him. "That is 50 cents. It is fresh." "And the cheese," he added, pointing to a wheel of yellow cheddar on the shelf behind her. "And a jar of peaches." She hesitated, then moved quickly, sensing a profit. She wrapped the bread in brown paper, cut a wedge of cheese, and placed the jar on the counter. She swept the dollar into her apron pocket. "Take it and go," she muttered. "I don't want trouble." Hawk gathered the items in his arms. He turned and walked out. The sun outside seemed blinding after the dim interior. The woman was still there. She had not moved, likely because she had nowhere to go. She was staring at the dust, her arms wrapped around herself as if trying to hold her shattered life together. Hawk stopped in front of her. He loomed over her, his shadow falling across her white dress. She looked up. Her face was smudged with dirt, but the structure of it was striking high cheekbones, a mouth that was full but currently set in a grim line, and eyes the color of river water. green and brown mixed together. Hawk held out the bread. The heat of the loaf seeped through the paper, warming his hands. "Take it," he said. She stared at the bread, then at his face. Her expression was a chaotic mix of confusion and suspicion. She had been raised on stories of the Comanche, tales of raids and scalps and brutality, and yet the civilized Christian woman inside had just told her to starve, while the savage was offering her sustenance. "Why?" she whispered. Her voice was barely audible over the wind. "Because," Hawk said, searching for the English words that would match the feeling in his chest. "No one should have to beg for the food of pigs." Her lip trembled. For a second, he thought she might strike the bread from his hand. Instead, her hunger won. She reached out, her fingers trembling violently. Her hands were small, the nails broken. As she took the loaf, her fingers brushed his. Her skin was cold. His was hot. The contact was electric, a sudden jolt that made them both pull back slightly. She tore the paper open. She did not wait. She broke off a chunk of the bread and put it in her mouth, chewing with a ferocity that was painful to watch. She closed her eyes, a small sound escaping her throat, a whimper of pure relief. Hawk placed the cheese and the jar of peaches on the upturned crate beside her. He took a step back, giving her space. A predator did not crowd a feeding animal. Around them, the town was waking up to the spectacle. The shout of the baker had drawn eyes. People were stopping on the boardwalks. Men were stepping out of the saloon. Whispers began to circulate, slithering through the air like snakes. "Look at her. That's the Hart girl. Ran off from Silas Calder. Can you imagine? They say she took the necklace. The jade one. Look who she's with. The Indian. Birds of a feather." Hawk heard them. He scanned the faces of the gathering crowd. He saw judgment. He saw lust in the eyes of some of the men who looked at the torn bodice of her dress. He saw the gleam of greed. "You should eat slowly," Hawk said to her, his voice low, "or you will be sick." She swallowed, opening her eyes. She looked at him, really looked at him. For the first time, she saw the scar that ran through his eyebrow, the dark intensity of his gaze, the way he stood relaxed but ready to kill. "Thank you," she said. It was a whisper, but it carried the weight of a shout. I am Lily." "I know who you are," Hawk said. "The whole town knows." Lily Hart lowered the bread, clutching it to her chest like a shield. She looked around at the gathering crowd, her face flushing with shame. She tried to pull the edges of her torn sleeves together to cover her arms. "They say you stole," Hawk said. He was not accusing. He was stating the facts of the wind. "I took what was mine," Lily said, her chin lifting again. The fire was back in her eyes. "My mother gave me a necklace. Silas, Mr. Calder, he claimed it was his. He claims everything is his. And the wedding, it was a sale," she said bitterly. "Not a wedding. My father owed a debt. It was the payment." She looked at Hawk, her gaze unflinching. "I would rather starve in the dirt than sleep in his bed." Hawk felt a grudging respect unfurl in his chest. She was small, and she was weak from hunger, but she had the heart of a warrior. She had chosen freedom over safety, even if that freedom meant death. He understood that choice. It was the same choice he made every morning when he woke up alone in his shack instead of reporting to the agency for a ration of beef. "If you stay here," Hawk said, his voice flat, "they will not let you starve. They will take you back to him." "I know," she said, her voice cracked. "He has a bounty on me. $100 for a wife. And the sheriff. Sheriff Briggs belongs to Silas," she said. "Everyone belongs to Silas." She looked at him, her eyes searching his face. "Why did you help me? You are not one of us." "That is why," Hawk said, before she could ask what he meant. The crowd parted. The movement was sudden, like a herd of deer splitting before a wolf. Heavy boots crunched on the gravel. A shadow fell over them, longer and darker than the others. "Well, well," a voice boomed. It was a voice like grinding stones. "Look what we have here, the runaway bride, having a picnic with the redskin." The hawk turned slowly. Standing 10 feet away was Buck Crowley. He was a massive man, built like a bull, with a neck that disappeared into his shoulders and a mustache that drooped over a cruel mouth. He was Silas Calder's foreman, his enforcer, his fist. He wore a gun belt that hung low on his hips, and his hands were hooked into it, fingers drumming near the grip of his revolver. 2 other men stood behind him, dusty cowhands with grins that promised violence. Lily gasped, dropping the bread. She pressed herself back against the wall, shrinking away. "Buck," she breathed. "Mr. Calder is very upset." "Miss Lily," Buck said, stepping closer. He ignored Hawk entirely, treating him as one might treat a piece of furniture. "He's been worried sick. You run off in the middle of the night, stealing family heirlooms." "I stole nothing," Lily cried. "The necklace belonged to my mother. That ain't what the judge will say." Buck leered. He took another step. "Now, you're coming with me. We got a wagon ready. Mr. Calder wants to discuss the terms of your return." He reached out a hand, his fingers thick and scarred, aiming for her arm. "No!" Lily screamed, slapping his hand away. Buck laughed. "Feisty. Silas likes that. Makes breaking you more fun." He reached again, this time faster, grabbing a fistful of her white silk sleeve. He yanked her forward. Lily stumbled, crying out in pain as the fabric dug into her skin. "Come here, you little—" A hand clamped over Buck's wrist. It was a dark hand, lean and corded with muscle. Buck froze. He looked down at the hand gripping him, then up into the face of the Comanche. Hawk had moved. He had moved with the speed of a striking snake, covering the distance between them in a blur. He stood between Lily and the foreman, his grip on Buck's wrist like an iron manacle. The street went silent. The piano in the saloon stopped. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "Let her go," Hawk said. His voice was not loud. It was soft, almost gentle, which made it terrifying. Buck Crowley's face turned a mottled shade of red. He was not used to being touched by anyone, let alone an Indian. "Get your hand off me, savage," Buck snarled, "or I'll cut it off." Hawk did not let go. He tightened his grip. Buck winced, his fingers involuntarily opening, releasing Lily's dress. Lily scrambled back, clutching her arm, her eyes wide with terror. "This is white man's business." "Hawk," Buck hissed, his other hand hovering over his gun. "You walk away. You get on that spotted pony of yours and you ride, or you die right here." Hawk looked at Buck. He looked at the gun. He looked at the 2 men behind Buck, who were now shifting their hands to their holsters. He knew the odds. 3 against 1, in the middle of a town that hated him. If he drew his knife, they would shoot him. If he did nothing, they would drag this woman back to a hell he could only imagine. He could walk away. He had done it 1,000 times. He had walked away when they fenced the buffalo grounds. He had walked away when they dammed the river. Survival was the only law. But then he heard the sound of Lily's breathing behind him. Ragged, terrified, but alive. He remembered the look in her eyes when she ate the bread. It was the look of a human being who just wanted to live. Hawk did not step back. He released Buck's wrist, but he did not retreat. He dropped his hand to his side, his fingers hovering inches from the bone handle of his knife. "She is not going with you," Hawk said. "Is that so?" Buck stepped back, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "And who's gonna stop me? You got no rights here. Boy, you got no standing. You're just a stray dog we let live because you're useful." "She said no," Hawk said. "She's property," Buck spat. "She belongs to Silas Calder, just like the land, just like the water, and just like you, if you knew what was good for you." Buck turned his head to the crowd. Sheriff Briggs." The sheriff pushed through the onlookers, his face sweating. He looked from Buck to Hawk, then to the trembling woman in the torn dress. Now," Briggs said, holding up his hands. "Let's not have a shooting in the street. Bad for business." "This Indian is interfering with lawful business," Buck said, pointing a thick finger at Hawk. "He assaulted me." Briggs looked at Hawk. "Hawk, you know the rules. You don't mix in." "He was hurting her," Hawk said. She's a runaway wife, Briggs said, wiping his brow. Technically, under the law. There was no wedding, Lily cried out. I never said I do. I ran before the vows. Doesn't matter, Buck interrupted. Debt is a debt. Her daddy signed the papers. Buck looked back at Hawk, his eyes narrowing. Last chance. Redskin. Step aside. Hawk felt the moment crystallize. It was a physical sensation, like the air turning to glass. He could see everything with painful clarity, the sweat on Buck's upper lip, the fly buzzing around the sheriff's hat, the way Lily's shadow merged with his own on the dusty boards. If he stepped aside, he saved his life. He kept his freedom. He kept his solitude. If he stood his ground, he lost everything. He looked at Lily. She was looking at him, and in her eyes, there was no longer just fear. There was hope, a terrible, fragile hope that he was who he appeared to be, a warrior. Hawk squared his shoulders. He shifted his weight, preparing to move, preparing to die if he must. No, Hawk said. Buck Crowley's grin vanished. His hand flashed toward his gun. Hawk's hand blurred toward his knife. The inciting incident was over. The story had begun, and the lonely Comanche was lonely no more. He was now a target. The tension in the street was tight enough to snap a bowstring. Buck Crowley's hand was a blur as it went for the Colt Navy revolver at his hip, a motion practiced in dusty saloons and lonely cow camps. To the townsfolk watching, it looked like death was coming for the Comanche, but Hawk did not move like a man. He moved like water flowing over a rock fluid, inevitable and unyielding. Before Crowley's fingers could curl around the walnut grip of his pistol, Hawk stepped inside the big man's guard. It was a step of supreme confidence. Hawk's left hand shot out, not to strike, but to seize. He caught Crowley's wrist, twisting it outward with a leverage that defied their difference in weight. At the same moment, Hawk drove the heel of his moccasin into the side of Crowley's knee. There was a sickening pop of cartilage and a bellow of pain that silenced the wind. Crowley buckled as the foreman fell. Hawk did not let go. He used the big man's own momentum to spin him, slamming him face first into the hard-packed dirt of the street. The impact sent a cloud of red dust puffing into the air. Hawk placed his knee in the center of Crowley's back and pressed the tip of his bone-handled knife against the base of the man's neck. It had taken less than 3 seconds. The two cowhands behind Crowley froze, their hands hovering uselessly over their weapons. They looked at their boss groaning in the dirt, then at the black eyes of the warrior who held his life in a trembling balance. They saw no mercy there, only a cold calculation. "Drop them," Hawk said. His voice was not a shout. It was a low rumble, like distant thunder. The cowhands looked at each other, then slowly used 2 fingers to lift their pistols and drop them into the dust. Enough. Sheriff Briggs pushed his way fully into the circle. His face flushed a deep, unhealthy crimson. He had his own gun drawn now, but he did not aim it. He waved it vaguely in the air, trying to regain control of a situation that had spiraled wildly out of his grasp. "Get off him." "Hawk," Briggs commanded, though his voice wavered slightly. "You cannot just butcher a man in the middle of my town." Hawk looked up at the sheriff. He did not remove the knife. He drew first. The town saw. "I saw a savage attacking a citizen," Briggs blustered, though his eyes darted nervously to the crowd. He saw the doubt in their faces. They were afraid of Hawk. Yes, but they had also seen Crowley bullying the girl. "Now let him up, or I will have the deputies fill you with lead." Hawk paused. He could feel the pulse of the man beneath his knee, the frantic beat of a predator turned prey. Slowly, deliberately, he sheathed his knife. He stood up and stepped back, his movements precise. Crowley scrambled to his feet, clutching his wrist, his face a mask of humiliation and rage. "I will kill you," he hissed, spitting blood and dirt. "I will string you up and skin you." "Quiet, Buck," Briggs snapped. The sheriff turned his glare on Hawk. He was in a bind. If he arrested Hawk, he risked a fight he might not win, and worse, he risked turning the Indian into a martyr or a monster, neither of which was good for business. But he had to show strength for Silas Calder. "You have worn out your welcome." "Hawk," Briggs said, holstering his gun with an angry shove. "You caused a disturbance. You assaulted a white man." "I defended a woman," Hawk replied. "That woman is none of your concern." Briggs pointed a shaking finger at the sun, which was beginning its slow descent toward the western peaks. "I'm giving you a choice. You have 1 hour, 60 minutes. If you are still within the limits of San Miguel Crossing when the shadow of the church steeple hits the saloon, I will lock you up. And her too." Briggs looked at Lily, his expression hardening. "And you, Miss Hart, you best find your way back to the Calder Ranch before Mr. Calder decides to stop being generous." It was a dismissal. It was a threat wrapped in the guise of mercy. Hawk understood the game. Briggs was giving them a head start to save himself the paperwork and the bloodshed. But once that hour was up, the hunt would be legal. Hawk turned to Lily. She was still pressed against the wall of the bakery. The loaf of bread clutched to her chest so tightly that her knuckles were white, her face was pale, her eyes wide with the shock of violence. She looked at the groaning foreman, then at the sheriff, and finally at Hawk. He stepped closer to her. The crowd parted for him, giving him a wide berth. "You heard him," Hawk said. His voice dropped. "Meant only for her." 1 hour. Lily swallowed hard. Where can I go?" "If you stay, they take you back," Hawk said. He did not sugarcoat the truth. He spoke it plainly, like describing the path of a river. "If you go alone, the desert takes you, or men like him find you." He nodded toward Crowley, who was being helped to his horse by his men, casting murderous glances over his shoulder. "Come with me," Hawk said. Lily stared at him. The proposition hung in the hot air between them. Come with him. With a Comanche, every story she had ever been told, every dime novel she had seen in her father's waiting room, painted men like him as devils. They were the monsters under the bed, the savages who stole women and burned cabins. But then she looked at his hands. They were resting at his sides, relaxed but strong. Those hands had just offered her bread when her own people offered her insults. Those hands had just taken down a giant to keep her from being dragged away. She looked at the town. The faces staring back at her were closed, judgmental, or leering. To them, she was already ruined. She was the property that had run away. "Why?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Why would you take me? I have no money. I have nothing." "You have your life," Hawk said. "Do you want to keep it?" Lily looked at the horizon. Beyond the town lay the vast, terrifying emptiness of the territory. But beyond that lay the unknown, and the unknown was the only place Silas Calder did not own. "Yes," she breathed. "Then walk," Hawk said. "Do not run. Walk to the horse." He turned and strode toward the Appaloosa. He did not look back to see if she was following. It was a test, perhaps, or simply a respect for her agency. Lily hesitated for a heartbeat. She felt the gaze of Frau Muller burning into her back. She felt the judgment of the sheriff. She took a breath that tasted of dust and fear, pushed herself off the wall, and followed him. A ripple of shock went through the crowd. To see a white woman, a doctor's daughter, willingly walking behind a warrior was a scandal that would be talked about for years. Hawk untied the reins. He mounted the horse in one fluid motion, the animal shifting its weight to accommodate him. He reached down, extending his arm. Lily looked at his hand. It was dark, calloused, scarred. She shifted the bread to her left arm and reached up with her right. His grip was firm, dry, and incredibly strong. With a pull that felt effortless, he swung her up behind him. "Hold on," he said. Lily wrapped her arm around his waist, through the thin cotton of his shirt. She could feel the heat of his skin and the hard, unyielding wall of his muscles. The scent of him filled her nose smoke, leather, sage, and something uniquely masculine that made her heart hammer against her ribs. "Hya!" Hawk urged the horse forward. The Appaloosa sprang into a trot, then a canter. They rode down the main street of San Miguel Crossing, past the saloon, past the church, past the sheriff who watched them go with a hand hovering near his gun. They left the town behind in a cloud of red dust. Hawk did not take the main road. The main road was for wagons and soldiers. It was straight, predictable, and easily watched. Instead, he guided the horse sharply to the south, cutting through a dry wash and up a steep embankment that led into the broken country of the foothills. The transition from civilization to wilderness was abrupt. The sounds of the town, the blacksmith's hammer, the barking dogs faded, replaced by the silence of the high desert. The only sounds were the rhythmic strike of hooves on stone and the wind hissing through the mesquite. For the first hour, they did not speak. Hawk was focused on the land. He rode with his head moving constantly, scanning the horizon, reading the ground. He kept them in the low ground, using the dry riverbed's arroyos to hide their movement. He knew that as soon as the sun touched the steeple, Briggs would send men, or worse. Crowley would come without the sheriff's badge. The heat was brutal. The sun hammered down on them, and Lily felt her skin burning. Her wedding dress, already torn, was heavy and hot. She was exhausted, her adrenaline fading into a dull ache in her bones. "Drink," Hawk said suddenly, passing back a canteen made of animal skin. Lily took it gratefully. The water was warm and tasted slightly of the hide, but it was the best thing she had ever drunk. She took 2 swallows and handed it back. "Keep it," he said. "We have a long way to go." "Where are we going?" she asked. Her voice was lost in the wind, sounding small and fragile. "Away," was his only answer. By late afternoon, the sky began to change. The relentless blue was being bruised by dark, towering clouds building in the west. The wind picked up, carrying the taste of ozone and grit. "Storm," Hawk muttered. "Sand and lightning." He urged the horse faster. The terrain was getting rougher, a maze of red sandstone canyons and scrub brush. Hawk seemed to know every rock and crevice. He guided them up a narrow trail that looked fit only for goats, climbing higher until they reached a small plateau sheltered by a massive overhang of rock. "Here," he said, pulling the horse to a halt. He slid off and reached up for her. Lily's legs were numb from the ride. As she slid down, her knees buckled. Hawk caught her, his hands gripping her waist to steady her. For a second, they were standing very close, the dust swirling around them. She looked up at him, breathless. He was tall, imposing, and his face was unreadable, but his hands were gentle. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to the back of the cave-like overhang. "I must hide the tracks before the wind covers them the wrong way." He spent the next 20 minutes working with a branch of sagebrush, sweeping away their footprints near the entrance of their refuge. By the time he finished, the sky had turned a violent shade of violet, and the wind was howling like a wounded animal. He led the horse into the shelter, hobbling it near the back. Then he turned his attention to the fire. Lily watched him. He moved with an economy of motion she had never seen. He gathered dried driftwood and brush, striking a spark with flint and steel. Within minutes, a small, smokeless fire was crackling, pushing back the gathering dark. The temperature plummeted as the storm front hit. The heat of the day vanished, replaced by a biting chill. Lily shivered, her torn silk dress offering no protection against the desert night. She wrapped her arms around herself, her teeth beginning to chatter. Hawk saw this. He stood up and unbuckled the leather coat he wore over his shirt. It was made of buckskin, fringed and stained, smelling of wood smoke. He walked over to her and draped it over her shoulders. "Wear this," he said. The coat was heavy and warm. It engulfed her small frame. She pulled it tight, the warmth seeping into her frozen skin. "Thank you," she said. Hawk sat opposite her. Across the small fire, the flickering light danced over his features, highlighting the sharp angles of his cheekbones and the depth of his eyes. Lily realized she was staring. Without the coat, his shirt was thin, and she could see the definition of his muscles, the corded strength of his arms. She also saw the scars. There was a jagged white line running down his forearm, and another fading mark on his neck. He was a map of violence. He was everything her father had warned her about, and yet, sitting here in the howling dark, he was the only safety she had. Eat, Hawk said, nodding at the bread she still clutched. Lily broke the loaf in half. She hesitated, then held out a piece to him. You too. Hawk looked at the bread, then at her. A flicker of surprise crossed his face. He took the piece. They ate in silence for a moment, the simple act of sharing food breaking down a wall between them. My father, Lily said suddenly, needing to fill the silence, needing to explain. He is a doctor, Dr. Hart. He is a good man, mostly, but he is weak. Hawk chewed slowly, listening. The sickness came 2 years ago, she continued, staring into the fire. Many died. My father treated everyone, even those who could not pay. He used his own money for medicine. He went into debt. And Calder bought the debt, Hawk guessed. Yes, $5,000. Lily shuddered. Silas came to the house. He didn't want the money. He said he wanted a wife of good breeding to make him look respectable in the capital. He offered to exchange the note for my hand. A trade, Hawk said, his voice bitter. Like a horse for a rifle. I tried to refuse, Lily whispered. But my father, he looked so old. I'm so tired. He said we would lose the house, the clinic. He begged me. She looked up, her eyes wet. I tried. Hawk, I truly tried. I put on the dress. But then, yesterday, I was in the parlor. Silas was there, a cowboy, a freedman named Sam, accidentally knocked over a glass of whiskey. Silas, she choked on the memory. Silas beat him. He beat him with his cane until the man couldn't stand, and he smiled while he did it. She took a deep breath. That was when I knew. It wasn't just a marriage. It was a prison. And I found a letter on his desk. He isn't going to forgive the debt. He plans to foreclose on my father's land anyway. After the wedding, he wants the water rights for the railroad. Hawk stared into the fire. The story was familiar. It was the same story, told in a different language. The treaties that were signed and broken. The promises made with forked tongues. Why? Lily asked again. The question that had been burning in her since the bakery. Why did you help me, your people? The Comanche, they hate us, and my people hunt you. Hawk was silent for a long time. He reached up and touched the stone necklace at his throat. Hate is easy, Hawk said finally. It is like a mesquite thorn. It grows everywhere, and it draws blood. He looked at her, his obsidian eyes reflecting the flames. I was a boy when the soldiers came to my village. They burned the winter lodges. We ran into the snow. My mother died there. Lily gasped softly. I hated them, Hawk continued. I hated every white face. I wanted to kill them all. But one winter, years later, I was starving. I was alone, scouting. I collapsed near a cabin. A woman found me. She was white. She had blue eyes, like the sky. He paused, the memory shifting in his mind. She could have shot me. She could have called the soldiers. Instead, she dragged me inside. She gave me soup. She hid me for 3 days. Her husband was a soldier, fighting my people. But she saved me. Hawk picked up a stick and poked the fire, sending sparks swirling up into the darkness. I learned then, he said. The war is not between the skin. The war is between those who take and those who give. Between the wolf who kills for sport and the wolf who kills to survive. He looked directly at Lily. Calder is a man who kills for sport. He feeds on fear. I do not help you because you are white. Lily Hart, I help you because I see the marks of the wolf on you, and I do not like wolves who eat the weak. Lily stared at him, her heart pounding in her chest. His words were simple, yet they struck her with the force of a revelation. She realized then that the savage across the fire was more noble than any man she had ever met in the parlors of San Miguel. The wind howled outside, screaming against the rock, but inside the small circle of firelight, the air felt different. It felt charged. Thank you, she whispered again. Sleep, Hawk said, lying back against his saddle. Tomorrow, the storm will pass, but the men will not. Lily pulled the buckskin coat tighter around her. She watched him close his eyes, though she knew he was not truly sleeping. He was listening to the wind, guarding the dark. For the first time in weeks, despite the hard ground and the cold, she felt a strange, impossible sense of safety. She closed her eyes. The image of the warrior burned into her mind and drifted into a sleep that was haunted not by monsters, but by the memory of a dark hand offering her bread. The news traveled faster than the wind across the high plains. By the time the sun had touched the western peaks, the telegraph lines and the riders had carried the word from San Miguel Crossing to every dusty outpost within 50 miles. Silas Calder wanted his property back. The price was $100 for the girl, alive and unmarked. The price for the Comanche was also $100. But the condition of his body was of less concern to the cattle baron. It was enough money to make a man forget his conscience. It was enough to turn farmers into hunters. And among those who heard the call was Jeb Rawlins, a tracker with eyes like chips of flint and a soul that had been sold long ago for silver. He did not rush. He simply checked his rifle, saddled his bay mare, and began to cut for sign. Hawk knew they were coming. He could feel it in the shifting of the air, a prickling at the base of his neck that had saved his life a dozen times before. He kept the Appaloosa moving through the broken country, avoiding the skylines, sticking to the hard rock where hooves left no imprint. They were passing through a narrow twist of canyon known as Devil's Gullet when the first trouble found them. It was not Rawlins. It was a group of 3 drifters who had likely seen them leave town and decided to try their luck. They were clumsy, their ambush poorly planned. A rifle crack echoed off the canyon walls. A bullet whined harmlessly overhead. Striking the sandstone 20 feet above them, Hawk reacted instantly. He did not panic. He swung the horse behind a large outcropping of rock, sliding from the saddle in one fluid motion. "Stay here," he commanded Lily. "Hold the reins. Keep the horse quiet." "Hawk, they have guns," Lily whispered, her face pale. "So do I," he said. "But a noise brings more wolves." He handed her the reins and vanished into the brush. He moved without sound, a shadow detaching itself from the stone. Lily pressed her back against the warm rock, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She heard shouting from down the canyon. "We got 'em pinned. Boys flank left." She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the roar of Hawk's Winchester. But there was only silence. Then, a sound of brush breaking to the right. "He's over there!" one of the men shouted. "Shoot him!" Gunfire erupted, tearing into the bushes. But Hawk was not there. He had thrown a rock, a simple trick of the hunter. While the men wasted their lead on a shadow, Hawk appeared behind the one on the left ridge. Lily heard a startled yelp, then the sound of a body hitting the ground. The shooting stopped. "Billy!" another voice called out, shaky now. "Billy, you see him?" There was no answer. Hawk moved to the second man. He did not use his knife. He used the stock of his rifle, a precise, calculated blow to the back of the knees, followed by a strike to the temple. The man crumpled. The third man, realizing he was alone against a ghost, threw his gun down and scrambled backward, tripping over his own spurs. I'm leaving. The man screamed, scrambling onto his horse and tearing back down the canyon as if the devil himself were snapping at his heels. Silence returned to the canyon. Hawk emerged from the rocks. He was breathing steadily, not even a sheen of sweat on his brow. He walked over to the unconscious men, collected their ammunition, and tossed their rifles into a deep fissure in the rocks where they would not be easily retrieved. Lily watched him from the safety of the overhang. She had expected bloodshed. She had expected him to slaughter them as the stories said his people did. Instead, he had dismantled them with the efficiency of a surgeon. He had spared their lives when he could have easily taken them. Hawk walked back to her, checking the horse. "Why didn't you kill them?" Lily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Hawk looked at her, his dark eyes unreadable. A dead man brings the law. A scared man brings a story. The story will make the others hesitate. He mounted the horse and pulled her up behind him. "We must go. The storm is close." They rode hard as the sky turned a bruised purple. The wind began to tear at them, carrying stinging grit. Thunder rumbled, low and menacing, shaking the ground beneath the hooves of the Appaloosa, just as the first fat drops of rain began to fall. turning the red dust to mud. Hawk spotted it. It was a remnant of a failed enterprise, a wooden shack left behind by railroad surveyors years ago. The roof was sagging and the door hung on one leather hinge. But it was a shelter. They reached it as the heavens opened. The rain came down in sheets, cold and violent. Hawk hurriedly led the horse into the lean-to attached to the side of the shack, then grabbed the saddlebags. He and Lily ducked inside the main room. It was dark and smelled of dry rot and ancient dust, but it was dry. Hawk used his boot to clear a space in the center of the floor. There was a stone hearth, miraculously intact. "The wood is dry in the corner," Hawk said. "Break it." While Lily gathered the old timber, Hawk struck his flint. Within minutes, a fire was blazing, casting long, dancing shadows against the rough-hewn walls. The wind howled outside, battering the shack, but the walls held. Lily stood near the fire, shivering violently. The buckskin coat Hawk had given her was soaked through, and her torn wedding dress underneath was clinging to her skin, heavy and cold. Her teeth chattered. Hawk looked at her. He saw the blue tint of her lips. "You must take the wet clothes off," he said, "or the fever will take you." Lily froze. She looked at him, then down at herself. The modesty of her upbringing warred with the survival instinct. Hawk stood up. He took a woolen blanket from his saddle roll. He found 2 rusty nails on the wall and strung a piece of rawhide between them, draping the blanket over it to create a partition. "I will tend the fire," he said, turning his back to the screen. "Dry your things." Lily stepped behind the blanket. Her fingers were numb and clumsy as she unbuttoned the ruined dress. She peeled the wet silk from her body, the fabric heavy with mud and rain. She laid it over a beam near the fire, naked. She wrapped herself in the only dry thing she had a second, thinner blanket Hawk had tossed over the partition. She stepped out. Hawk was sitting on the floor, cleaning his rifle. He did not look up immediately. When he did, the firelight caught the softness of her shoulder where the blanket had slipped. He looked away quickly, focusing on the flames. "Come close to the heat," he said. Lily sat down. She was still shivering, deep tremors that shook her core. She held her hands out to the fire, but she could not stop shaking. Hawk set the rifle down. He moved closer, shifting on his knees until he was beside her. "Give me your hands," he said. She hesitated, then extended them. He took her hands in his. His palms were large, rough with calluses, but radiating an intense heat. He rubbed her hands between his, the friction creating warmth that seeped into her frozen fingers. "Better?" he asked. His voice was rough, lower than usual. "Yes," Lily whispered. She looked at him. He was close, very close. She could smell the rain on his skin, the scent of pine and sage. She could see the droplets of water caught in his long black hair. The firelight softened the sharp angles of his face, making him look less like a statue and more like a man. A strange feeling unfurled in her chest. It was not fear. It was a pull, magnetic and terrifying. She had been taught that men like him were less than human. Yet, here he was, tending to her with a gentleness that Silas Calder had never shown. Silas touched her as if he owned her. Hawk touched her as if she were precious, but free. "You are shaking still," Hawk murmured. "I am cold," she said. But it was not just the cold. Hawk shifted. He opened his arm, an invitation that required no words. Lily did not think. She leaned into him. He wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her against his side. The heat of his body was shocking. She rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid thump of his heart beneath his shirt. They sat there for a long time, the storm raging outside, the fire popping and hissing inside. Hawk stared into the flames, his mind a battlefield. He felt the softness of her hair against his neck. He felt the curve of her body against his. It stirred a hunger in him that had nothing to do with food, but it also stirred fear. He remembered his mother. He remembered the women of his tribe who had been taken or killed. To care for a white woman was to invite disaster. It was a betrayal of the blood spilled on this land. She belonged to the world that was destroying him. She is not the world, a voice inside him whispered. She is just Lily. He looked down at her. Her eyes were closed, her breathing slowing as the warmth took hold. She looked fragile, yet he knew she was strong. She had walked away from a life of ease to starve rather than be a slave. That was a spirit he recognized. That was Comanche spirit, wrapped in pale skin. Lily opened her eyes. She caught him watching her. The air between them thickened, charged with an unspoken question. She did not pull away. She shifted slightly, her face tilting up toward his. For a moment, Hawk thought he might kiss her. He wanted to. The desire to taste her mouth, to claim this moment of peace in the midst of war, was overwhelming, but he did not. He was a warrior, and he had a duty to protect her, even from himself. He squeezed her shoulder gently. "Rest," he said. "I will watch." Lily let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. There was disappointment in it, but also relief. She closed her eyes again, listening to the rain, feeling safe in the circle of his arm. The next morning it was clear and cold. The storm had scrubbed the world clean. They rode out early, the mud drying quickly in the rising sun. By midday, they reached a small adobe structure nestled in a valley of yucca and prickly pear. It was a way station, a lonely outpost on the old trade route. An older Mexican woman was sweeping the porch. When she saw Hawk, she dropped her broom and ran out, wiping her hands on her apron. "Hawk!" she cried. "Madre de Dios, it is good to see you." This was Rosa. A massive man stepped out of the door behind her. His skin was the color of deep ebony, his hair graying at the temples. "Sam, you bring trouble, brother," Sam asked, his voice deep and gravelly, though his eyes were kind. "Trouble follows me," Hawk said, dismounting. He helped Lily down. Rosa looked at Lily, taking in the blanket wrapped around her, the bruised feet, the exhaustion. She did not ask questions. She simply clucked her tongue and put an arm around Lily's waist. "Come, child," Rosa said. "I have hot water. I have soup. Men can talk. We will fix you." Inside the cool adobe, Lily found herself seated at a rough wooden table. Rosa brought a bowl of bean soup and warm tortillas. It was the best meal Lily had ever tasted. Sam brought water for the horse and spoke quietly with Hawk by the door. Later, after Lily had washed the dust from her skin and Rosa had given her a simple calico dress to replace the ruined wedding gown, they gathered around the table. Sam looked serious. He placed a heavy hand on the table. "You need to know, Hawk," Sam said. "It is not just a bride hunt. Silas has men riding every trail. He is scared." "Scared of what?" Hawk asked. "Losing face, losing everything," Sam said. "I worked for him. You remember before I bought this place, I heard things. He is desperate." Lily set her spoon down. The silence in the room was heavy. She looked at Hawk, then at Sam. "He isn't afraid of me leaving," Lily said softly. "He is afraid of what I know." Hawk turned to her. "What do you know?" Lily took a deep breath. "The night before the wedding, I went to his study to beg him one last time to cancel the debt. He wasn't there, but his papers were on the desk. Maps, contracts." She looked directly at Hawk. "He has a new survey map. It covers the Sweetwater Valley, the land north of the river." Hawk went still. "The Sweetwater is Nermerna land. It was granted by the Treaty of '68. The agency promised it to my mother's people for winter camp." "Silas has a new treaty," Lily said, "or a paper that looks like one. It has signatures of chiefs who are dead. It says the tribe ceded the rights to the water and the grazing land for the railroad expansion." Hawk's hands clenched into fists on the table. The knuckles turned white. "He forged them. He plans to present it to the governor next month," Lily continued. "Once the railroad is built, the land is gone. He will own the water. He will force the tribe onto the dry rock of the reservation. That is why he wanted to marry you," Sam realized. "To get your father's land, which borders the Sweetwater. It gives him the access route. "And if I run away," Lily said, her voice trembling, "and if I tell anyone about the papers, then his plan dies," Hawk finished. "And he goes to prison." Hawk stood up. He walked to the window and looked out at the vast, empty landscape, the Sweetwater Valley. It was where he had learned to hunt. It was where his mother was buried. It was the last piece of earth his people could call home, the last place where the spirits could rest. He had told himself this was not his fight. He had told himself he was just saving a woman from a bad man. But it was a lie. Silas Calder was not just hurting Lily. He was erasing Hawk's past. He was stealing the future of the people Hawk had tried to leave behind. The conflict in his chest tightened. He looked back at Lily. She was watching him, fear and determination in her eyes. She was no longer just a burden or a stranger. She was the key. She held the truth that could save the valley. "He stole the land," Hawk said, his voice low and dangerous. "He stole the names of the dead to sell the earth." He turned to face them. The stoic mask was gone. In its place was the fierce, terrifying visage of a warrior who had found a war worth fighting. "We do not run anymore," Hawk said. "What do we do?" Lily asked. "We go back," Hawk said. "But not to surrender. We are going to take the land back." Sam smiled, a slow, grim expression. He reached under the counter and pulled out a box of ammunition. "I reckoned you might say that," Sam said. "You're going to need these?" Hawk looked at Lily. "Are you brave enough?" Lily Hart. Lily stood up in her borrowed dress. She looked small, but she stood straight. "He took my life," she said. "I want it back. I am with you. Hawk." The bond between them snapped into place, stronger than iron. It was no longer just attraction. It was an alliance. And out in the red dust, the wind seemed to change direction, blowing back toward San Miguel Crossing, carrying the scent of a storm that had nothing to do with rain. The decision to return to San Miguel Crossing was not made lightly. It was forged in the cool, blue shadows of the early morning, while the desert was still shaking off the chill of the night. The news that Sam had shared sat heavy in the center of the small adobe room. Silas Calder was not just a man looking for a runaway bride. He was a machine of acquisition, devouring the territory acre by acre. If they ran, they would survive. They could disappear into the jagged spine of the mountains or drift south into Mexico. But the land, the Sweetwater Valley, the resting place of Hawk's ancestors, and the homestead of Dr. Hart would be swallowed whole. The fences would go up, the water would be diverted, and the history of the Nermernu would be erased by the stroke of a pen on a fraudulent treaty. Hawk stood by the window, watching the sun crest the horizon. He turned to Lily. She was wearing the simple calico dress Rosa had given her, her hair braided back, looking less like a ghost and more like a woman of the earth. "If we go back," Hawk said, his voice level, "we walk into the fire. There is no shade in the town square. If we run," Lily replied, her hand steady as she poured coffee into tin cups, "we carry the fire with us. It will burn us up eventually." She looked at him, and he saw the steel in her spine. The frightened girl who had begged for bread was gone. In her place was someone who had tasted the dust and found she could spit it out. "We go back," Hawk agreed. The preparations were swift and grim. Sam, despite his age and the limp he carried from years of hard labor, insisted on riding with them. He knew the layout of Calder's operations, and more importantly, he knew where the bodies were buried metaphorically and literally. "I have seen the contracts," Sam said as he checked the cinch on his mule. "I worked in the office sweeping floors before I bought this place. I saw him practice the signatures. He traced them from old army reports. He is a thief with an inkwell." "We need proof," Hawk said. "Words are wind, paper is rock." "I will write it down," Lily said. "I will write everything I heard, everything I saw, and I will tell them about the necklace." While Rosa helped Lily draft the letter, a testament to be hidden in her bodice, Hawk took Lily out behind the adobe station. He placed a heavy Colt revolver in her hand. It looked massive against her slender wrist. "It is not a toy," Hawk said, standing close behind her, adjusting her grip. "Do not close your eyes. If you close your eyes, You aim at nothing. Look at the target. Breathe out. Squeeze. Do not pull. Yum. Lily fired. The recoil shocked her, snapping her wrist back, but the bullet struck the fence post. Again, Hawk ordered. They spent an hour there, the sharp crack of gunpowder punctuating the morning silence. By the time they were ready to leave, Lily's hand was sore, but her eyes were dry. She holstered the gun at her waist, hidden beneath the folds of the calico. The drive back to San Miguel Crossing felt different than the flight away. The heat was just as oppressive, the dust just as red, but the fear had transmuted into a cold, hard resolve. They did not sneak through the canyons this time. They rode the main road. They arrived just as the town was settling into the midday lull. The sun was a white hammer in the sky, beating down on the wooden roofs in the dusty street. When Hawk and Lily rode into the main thoroughfare, flanked by Sam on his mule, the town stopped. A silence rippled outward from their position, silencing the blacksmith's hammer and the piano in the saloon. Men stepped out of the shadows of the boardwalks, shading their eyes. Women peered through curtains. They had expected the sheriff to drag the runaway back in chains, or perhaps to see her body draped over a saddle. They did not expect to see her riding upright, clean and calm, beside the Comanche warrior, with a free black man at her flank. It was a procession that defied every social law of the territory. They rode straight to the town square, a dusty patch of open ground between the church and the sheriff's office. Hawk pulled the Appaloosa to a halt. He did not dismount immediately. He sat high, letting the people see him. He let them see that he was not hiding. The door to the sheriff's office opened. Sheriff Briggs stepped out, a half-eaten sandwich in one hand, which he quickly dropped. His eyes widened. "Sweet mother of Abraham," Briggs muttered. From the other side of the square, near the hotel, the doors swung open. Silas Calder stepped out. He was dressed in a dark suit that defied the heat, a silk cravat at his throat, looking every inch the lord of the manor. Beside him walked Jeb Rawlins, the bounty hunter, looking lean and hungry, his hand resting casually on his gun. Buck Crowley, his arm in a sling from his encounter with Hawk, limped out behind them, followed by 3 more hired guns. The stage was set. It was a theater of dust and violence. The audience was the entire population of San Miguel Crossing. "Well," Silas Calder said, his voice projecting across the square with the practiced ease of a politician. "The prodigal bird returns to the cage." He stepped off the boardwalk and walked into the sunlight, stopping 10 paces from the horses. He smiled, but it was a smile that did not reach his eyes. His eyes were cold chips of blue ice. "Sheriff," Silas called out, not looking away from Lily, "I believe you have a job to do. Arrest that savage for kidnapping, and bring my fiancée to me." Sheriff Briggs shifted his weight. He looked at the crowd gathering on the edges of the square. He looked at the guns on Silas's side. He looked at Hawk. "Get down." "Hawk," Briggs said, his voice lacking conviction. "Don't make this a bloodbath." Hawk dismounted smoothly. He reached up and helped Lily down. She stood beside him, her head high. She did not tremble. "There was no kidnapping," Lily said. Her voice was clear, ringing off the wooden facades of the buildings. "I left of my own will." "You are confused, my dear," Silas said, his tone dripping with condescension. "The heat has added to you. You are my betrothed. You are carrying my property." "I am carrying nothing that belongs to you," Lily retorted. She reached into the neckline of her dress and pulled out the necklace. The jade stone caught the sunlight, glowing with a deep, verdant fire. "This," she announced, turning to face the crowd, "belonged to my mother, Sarah Hart. Many of you knew her. You know she wore it every Sunday." A murmur went through the crowd. The older woman nodded. They remembered Sarah Hart. "Mr. Calder claims it is a family heirloom of his own," Lily continued, her voice rising. "Just as he claims the land in the Sweetwater Valley belongs to him." Silas's face tightened. The mask of civility slipped for a fraction of a second. "That is enough, Sheriff. Arrest her for theft and slander. She is hysterical." "I am not hysterical," Lily shouted. "I am a witness," Silas Calder forged the treaties. He plans to take the sweet water from the tribe and the water rights from the town. He forced my father into debt to steal his land because it blocks railroad access. The murmurs grew to a roar. The mention of water rights struck a nerve. In the West, a man might forgive an insult, but he would kill over water. Lies. Silas bellowed, his composure cracking. She is sleeping with the Indian. She has been corrupted. She is a fallen woman trying to save her skin. Sam stepped forward then. He looked massive and immovable. I worked in your office, Mr. Calder. I saw the papers. I saw you tracing the names of dead chiefs. You shut your mouth, boy. Buck Crowley snarled, stepping forward with his good hand hovering near his gun. Or I'll shut it for you. Let him speak, a voice called from the crowd. It was the pastor, an old man with a white beard and a Bible in his hand. He stepped off the church porch. If there is truth to be heard, let it be heard under the eyes of God. This is not a court, Silas screamed. He pointed a shaking finger at Hawk. That man is a savage. He is a danger to every decent Christian here. Jeb, earn your money. The air in the square seemed to vanish, sucked away by the sudden intake of breath from 100 people. Jeb Rollins did not hesitate. He was a professional. He saw the shift in the crowd, the way the town was turning against his employer. He knew the only way to end this was with a bullet. Jeb's hand flashed. He drew his revolver with blinding speed. Bang! The shot cracked like a whip, but it was not aimed at Hawk. Jeb fired into the dirt at Lily's feet, sending a spray of red dust onto her dress. It was a warning, a demand for silence. Next one goes in her belly, Jeb said, his voice flat and dead. Now everyone calms down. Chaos erupted. The crowd screamed and scattered back, but Hawk was already moving. When the dust kicked up, Hawk shoved Lily hard to the left, behind the bulk of the water trough. In the same motion, he dropped to one knee, the Winchester rifle he had been holding loosely suddenly snapping to his shoulder. He did not fire at Jeb. He fired at the wooden post of the hotel overhang, directly above Jeb's head. The bullet shattered the wood. A heavy hanging flower pot, detached by the impact, crashed down. Jeb flinched, looking up instinctively. That split second was all Hawk needed. He cycled the lever of the Winchester and fired again. This bullet struck the dirt right between Jeb's boots. Drop it, Hawk roared. Jeb Rollins, recovering his senses, swung his gun toward Hawk. Hawk dropped the rifle and drew his knife, closing the distance not to kill, but to disrupt. He kicked a barrel of rainwater toward the gunman. Jeb fired, the bullet tearing through the wood of the barrel, water spraying everywhere. Sam was moving too. He tackled Buck Crowley, the two men going down in a heap of dust and curses. Silas Calder saw his control disintegrating. He saw the town watching him with hatred. He saw Lily crouching behind the trough, her hand reaching for the pistol Hawk had given her. You witch! Silas screamed. He drew a small, pearl-handled derringer from his vest pocket. He ignored Hawk. He aimed directly at Lily. No! The shout came from Dr. Hart, who had burst out of the clinic door at the sound of gunfire, but he was too far away. Silas thumbed the hammer back. Hawk was 10 feet away, engaged with Jeb, who was trying to pistol whip him. Hawk saw Silas aim. He saw the geometry of death lining up. He abandoned the fight with Jeb. He took a blow to the shoulder that numbed his arm, but he spun away, drawing the Colt revolver he had taken from the men in the canyon. He did not aim for the chest. He did not aim for the head. He remembered the lesson he had taught Lily. Look at the target. Hawk fired. The heavy .44 caliber bullet screamed across the square. It struck Silas Calder's right hand. The impact was devastating. The derringer went flying into the dust. Silas shrieked, a high, thin sound like a rabbit caught in a trap. He clutched his shattered hand to his chest, falling to his knees, his expensive suit immediately soaking up the blood and the dirt. Jeb Rollins, seeing his employer down and Hawk turning the gun toward him, froze. He looked at Hawk's eyes. They were not the eyes of a savage. They were the eyes of a judge. Drop it, Hawk said again. Jeb hesitated. He looked at the crowd. Rosa had stepped out with a shotgun. The blacksmith, Olaf was holding a heavy hammer. The pastor was standing like a stone pillar. Jeb Rollins slowly opened his hand. His revolver thudded into the dust. Silence returned to the square. But it was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of a storm that had just broken. Silas was moaning, rocking back and forth. "My hand! He shot my hand!" Lily stood up from behind the trough. She was shaking, but she walked forward. She still held her gun, but it was pointed at the ground. She stopped in front of Silas. "It is over, Silas," she said. You ruined me." Silas gasped, sweat pouring down his pale face. "I own this town. I own you." "You own nothing," a voice said. Sheriff Briggs stepped forward. He walked past Hawk, past Lily, and stood over Silas. He looked down at the man who had paid his bribes for 5 years. He looked at the shattered hand, and then he looked at the faces of the voters who were watching him. Briggs was a corrupt man, but he was a survivor. He knew when a ship was sinking. "Silas Calder," Briggs said, his voice loud and official. "You are under arrest." "What?" Silas choked out. "You work for me. I work for the law." Briggs lied, pulling a pair of iron cuffs from his belt. "And the law says you don't shoot at unarmed women in my town, and we're going to have a long talk about those treaties Sam mentioned." Briggs looked at his deputies. "Get Jeb and Buck. Put them in the cells. Use the leg irons." As the deputies moved in, hauling the groaning men away, the tension in the crowd finally broke. A cheer went up ragged at first, then louder. It wasn't just for Lily. It was for the release of a pressure that had been building for years. Rosa ran to Lily, embracing her. Sam dusted himself off, grinning despite a split lip. But Hawk stood apart. He holstered his borrowed gun. He picked up his rifle from the dirt. He saw the celebration, but he did not join it. He was the instrument of their liberation, but he was still the outsider. Dr. Hart pushed through the crowd. He ran to Lily, tears streaming down his face. "Lily! Oh, God, Lily! I am so sorry." Lily hugged her father, but her eyes were searching the crowd. She found him. Hawk was standing by the Appaloosa, checking the cinch. He looked ready to ride. She pulled away from her father and walked toward him. The crowd parted for her, and then, seeing where she was going, they fell silent again. She stopped in front of him. "You are leaving?" she asked. "The fight is done," Hawk said. "The wolf is in the cage." "You were injured," she said, reaching out to touch his shoulder where Jeb had struck him. "It is nothing," he said. He looked at the town, then at her. "They cheer now, but tomorrow they will remember I am Comanche, and they will remember you standing with me." "Let them remember," Lily said fiercely. "I do not care what they remember. I care about who is standing here." She took his hand, the hand that had saved her, the hand that had shot the gun out of a tyrant's grip. She held it in front of everyone. "Do not go back to the river alone," she said. Hawk looked at her hand in his, brown skin against white. It was a contrast that the world said should not exist, but as he looked into her eyes, eyes that had seen his soul and not flinched, he realized that the loneliness he had carried for 20 years was gone. He looked at Sheriff Briggs, who was watching them warily. He looked at the pastor, who nodded slowly. He looked at Sam and Rosa. "I cannot live in the town," Hawk said quietly. "The walls are too close." "Then we will find a place where the walls are far enough away," Lily said. "But we will find it together." Hawk squeezed her hand. It was a promise. Silas Calder screamed as the sheriff dragged him toward the jailhouse, ranting about lawyers and governors. But his voice was thin and fading, swallowed by the vast, indifferent sky of the west. The sun was beginning to set, painting the clouds in gold and violent violet. It was the end of the day, and the end of the old order in San Miguel Crossing. Hawk mounted his horse, but he did not ride away alone. He extended his hand down, and for the second time, Lily Hart took it. The dust in San Miguel Crossing did not settle simply because the shooting had stopped. It hung in the air, thick and expectant, much like the mood of the town itself. The jailhouse, a brick structure that had seen more drunks than desperados in its time, was now the center of a storm that refused to break. Silas Calder was behind bars, but he was not silent. For 3 days, he had paced the small cell like a caged mountain lion, his shattered hand bandaged in white linen that was slowly turning gray. He demanded lawyers from Austin. He demanded the governor. He wrote letters with his good left hand, scratching out threats on paper that Sheriff Briggs tiredly accepted and placed in a drawer, promising to send them on the next stagecoach. But the stagecoach came and went, and Silas remained. The power of the cattle baron was a strange thing. It relied on the belief that he was untouchable. Now that the town had seen him bleed, now that they had seen him crawl in the dirt clutching a ruined hand, the spell was cracking. Sheriff Briggs sat at his desk, cleaning his fingernails with a knife. He looked tired. He had bet his badge on the shifting wind, and he knew the wind could shift back. "You are making a mistake, Briggs," Silas hissed from the cell. "When my associates hear of this, you will be lucky to sweep floors in a saloon." "Maybe," Briggs said, not looking up. "But I have been reading these contracts Sam told us about, the ones in your safe. That is private property." "It is evidence," Briggs corrected. "And it seems you have been selling water rights that do not belong to you to investors in the East. That is federal fraud. Silas, the governor might pardon a land grab, but he won't pardon a man who makes him look like a fool to the bankers in New York." Silas gripped the bars, his face pale. He knew, deep down, that the sharks were circling. And in the world of men like Silas Calder, a wounded shark was eaten first. While the old order rotted in the jailhouse, Lily Hart was facing the ghost of her own past. She sat in the front room of her father's clinic. The smell of carbolic acid and dried herbs was familiar, a scent that used to mean home. Now, it smelled like a place she had outgrown. Dr. Hart sat opposite her. He looked older than she remembered, though it had only been days. His hands, usually so steady when stitching a wound, were trembling as he held a cup of tea. "The debt is gone," Dr. Hart said softly. "The judge in the Capitol sent a telegram, pending the investigation into Silas. All debts held by him are frozen. We are free." "Lily, you are free." "Father," Lily said. Her voice was gentle, but there was a distance in it that had not been there before. The doctor looked up, his eyes wet. "I did it to save us. You must believe that. I thought if you married him, you would be safe. You would have a big house, servants. I would have been a prisoner," Lily said. "He beat his workers. Father, do you think he would have stopped at the door of his bedroom?" Dr. Hart flinched. He looked away, shame coloring his cheeks. "I was a coward. I was afraid of being poor. I was afraid of losing this building." "We all have fear," Lily said. She reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. It was the same gesture Hawk had used to warm her hands in the storm, a transfer of strength. "But fear is not an excuse to sell a human being." "I am sorry," he whispered. "Can you forgive me?" "I forgive you," Lily said. "But things are not the same. I am not the little girl who sweeps the floor and waits for orders." She withdrew her hand and sat back, her spine straight against the chair. "I do not belong to anyone as property, not to Silas, and not to you. I will live my own life." "With him?" the doctor asked, his voice hesitant. "With the Comanche?" "With Hawk," Lily corrected. "His name is Hawk, and yes, if he will have me." The doctor sighed, a long, rattling sound. He looked at his daughter and saw the steel that had been forged in the fire last week. "He saved you when I did not. I have no right to object, but it will be a hard life. Lily, the town, they will talk." "Let them talk," Lily said. "I have walked through the desert barefoot. Words cannot hurt my feet anymore." While Lily made her peace with her father, Hawk stood by the river, miles upstream from the town. The water was low, sluggish in the heat, moving slowly over the red stones. He was not alone. A rider had come down from the high plains that morning. It was Tall Bear, a man Hawk had hunted with when they were both young, before the reservations, before the fences. The tall bear wore the clothes of the white man, trousers and a flannel shirt, but his hair was long, and his eyes held the ancient sadness of their people. They stood by the horses, the Appaloosa nickering at Tall Bear's roan mare. "The soldiers are moving the boundary stones again," Tall Bear said in their native tongue. "They say the paper Silas Calder sent to Washington gives them the valley." "Calder is in a cage," Hawk replied. "His hand is broken. His power is broken. His power is ink on paper," Tall Bear said. "Ink does not die when a man is hurt. The army has the paper. They say the chiefs signed it." Hawk spat into the dirt. "They sign nothing. They are dead men." "We know that," Tall Bear said. "But the white judge does not. There is to be a hearing. In the fort, they need a witness. Someone who walks between worlds." Hawk stiffened. He looked at the river, watching a hawk circle high above in the thermal currents. "You want me to talk to them, to stand in their square house and use their words. You speak their tongue better than any of us," Tall Bear said. "You know their laws. If you tell them what you know about Calder, about the forgery, maybe they stop the soldiers. Maybe we keep Sweetwater for one more winter." Hawk felt the old conflict tightening his chest. He hated the forts. He hated the smell of the agency offices, the condescension of the officers, the way they looked at him as a curiosity or a nuisance. To go there was to acknowledge their authority. "I wanted to be free of them," Hawk said bitterly. "I wanted to live where the wind blows, not where the gavel bangs. There is no place left where the wind blows alone." "Brother," Tall Bear said gently, "the Iron Road is coming. We fight with bows. We die. We fight with words. Maybe we live." Tall Bear mounted his horse. He looked down at Hawk. "The hearing is in 10 days. Think about it." Hawk watched him ride away, disappearing into the heat shimmer. He felt a weight on his shoulders, heavier than a buffalo robe. To help his people, he had to step further into the white world. To keep his freedom, he had to play by their rules. That evening, Hawk and Lily rode up to the high ridge that overlooked the valley. Below them, San Miguel Crossing was a cluster of lanterns in the twilight, small and insignificant against the vastness of the darkening prairie. They dismounted and sat on a flat rock, the heat of the day radiating up through the stone. Hawk was quiet, brooding. Lily sat close to him, their shoulders touching. "My father is well," Lily said softly. "He is learning to be a father again. Not a debtor." "That is good," Hawk said. "And your friend?" Lily asked. She had seen the rider from a distance. "He brings old troubles," Hawk said. "The tribe needs me to speak to the army, to tell the truth about Silas and the land. Will you do it?" "If I do, I admit that their law owns the land," Hawk said, his voice rough. "I become part of the machine." Lily turned to him. She took his hand, tracing the calluses on his palm with her thumb. "Hawk," she said, "you are not part of the machine. You are the wrench thrown into the gears. If you speak, you save the valley. Is that not the warrior's way to protect the land?" Hawk looked at her. Her logic was clear, piercing through his pride. She was right. "I will do it," he said. "For the Sweetwater, not for them." He fell silent again, looking down at the town lights. "And after, where do we go, Lily? I cannot live in that town. I cannot sleep where the air smells of coal and lies." "I know," Lily said. "And I cannot live in a teepee on the high plains. Hawk, I do not know how to scrape hides. I do not know your language well enough to be family to your people. I would be an outcast there, just as you are an outcast here." It was the truth they had both been avoiding. They were two people from different worlds who had met on a bridge, but bridges were not places to live. "Then we are homeless," Hawk said. "No," Lily said firmly. She pointed down toward the river, to a bend where the water slowed and the cottonwood trees grew thick and tall. It was miles from the town, but not yet in the deep territory of the tribe. It was a green strip of land, wild but welcoming. "We build there," Lily said. "On the edge. Not in the town, not in the camp. We build our own place." Hawk looked at the place she pointed to. It was good land. There was water, There was grass for the horses. There was wood for a fire. A homestead, Hawk said, testing the word. It was a white man's word. A home, Lily corrected. A place where you can hunt and I can grow herbs. A place where my father can ride out to see me, and your brother can ride down to see you. We do not have to choose a side. Hawk, we can be the bridge. Hawk looked at her face, illuminated by the rising moon. He saw the hope in her eyes, a hope that was stronger than fear. He realized that for all his years of wandering, searching for freedom, he had been looking for the wrong thing. He had thought freedom was an absence of fences, of laws, of people. But looking at Lily, he understood that freedom was a presence. It was the ability to choose where to sleep, who to trust, and who to love. We will need an axe, Hawk said, and a saw. Lily smiled, an expression that lit up the dusk. I think Sam has a saw he can lend us. The weeks that followed were hard, filled with the kind of labor that broke backs and calloused hands. But it was good work. It was the labor of creation. They staked out the land by the river bend. Hawk traded 2 good deerskins for an axe and a bag of nails. Lily traded her knowledge of herbs to Rosa for a sack of seed corn and some dried beans. They worked from sunrise to sunset. Hawk felled the cottonwoods, stripping the bark, notching the logs with precision. Lily mixed the mud for the chinking, gathered river stones for the hearth, and cleared the brush for a garden. The town of San Miguel watched them with a wary curiosity. At first, there were whispers. People expected them to fail. They expected the Comanche to run off, or the white girl to come crawling back. But they did not fail. Slowly, the mood shifted. It started with Olaf, the blacksmith. One afternoon, he rode out with a wagon full of scrap iron. He dropped off a heavy grate for their fireplace and a set of hinges for a door. For the roof, Olaf rumbled, gesturing to the heavy beams Hawk was lifting. You need good spikes. Come by the shop. I trade for venison. Then came Rosa and Sam. They arrived on a Sunday, driving a cart. In the back was a sturdy table made of oak, scarred but solid, and 2 chairs. A house needs a table, Rosa declared, bustling around to set out a pot of stew she had brought. Otherwise, you are just camping. Sam helped Hawk lift the ridgepole into place. They worked in rhythm, men who understood the language of sweat. Even Dr. Hart came. He rode a hired horse. Looking uncomfortable in the saddle but determined, he brought a box wrapped in oilcloth. Inside were medical books, a mortar and pestle, and a supply of quinine and clean bandages. If you are to be this far out, the doctor told Lily, avoiding Hawk's eyes but nodding respectfully. You will need these. People will come to you. The ranchers, the travelers. You have the hands for healing. Lily. It was an acceptance. Not a complete integration, but a truce. They were creating a space that was respected because it was earned. Then came the night the roof was finished. It was late autumn. The air had a crisp bite to it, smelling of fallen leaves and cooling earth. The cabin was rough, the floor was still packed earth, and the windows were covered with oiled paper rather than glass. But it had 4 walls and a roof that kept out the wind. Inside, a fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting a warm, golden glow over the fresh wood. The oak table sat in the center, a silent promise of meals to come. Hawk and Lily sat on a buffalo robe in front of the fire. They were exhausted. Their clothes were dusted with sawdust and dried mud. Hawk's shirt was open at the throat, revealing the sheen of sweat on his chest. Lily's hair was loose, falling around her shoulders in a golden curtain. They ate a simple meal of cornbread and dried meat, sharing a cup of water. When they finished, Hawk set the cup down. He looked around the cabin. It was small. It was simple, but it was theirs. It is strong, Hawk said. It is perfect, Lily replied. She looked at him. In the firelight, the sharp angles of his face were softened. He looked younger, the weight of the lonely years lifting from his brow. Hawk stood up. He extended his hand to her. Stand with me, he said. Lily took his hand and rose. They stood in the center of the room, the firelight dancing on the walls. There was no music, only the sound of the river moving outside and the pop of the cedar logs in the hearth. Hawk placed one hand on her waist. He pulled her close, eliminating the space between them. Lily rested her hands on his chest, feeling the solid, steady rhythm of his heart. They began to move, a slow, swaying rhythm that had no steps to follow, only the instinct of two bodies seeking alignment. "You stayed," Hawk murmured, his chin resting near her temple. "Everyone leaves, but you stayed." "I had nowhere else to go," Lily teased gently, though her voice was thick with emotion. Hawk pulled back slightly so he could look into her eyes. "You had everywhere to go. You could have gone east. You could have found a man with a soft house and soft hands." "I do not want soft hands," Lily whispered. She ran her fingers up his chest, tracing the line of his collarbone, feeling the rough texture of his skin. "I want hands that can build, hands that can hold." Hawk's breath hitched. He looked at her mouth. The desire that had been simmering between them for weeks, held in check by danger and labor, finally boiled over. But it was not a frantic, desperate thing. It was slow. It was deep. He lowered his head. Lily rose on her tiptoes to meet him. Their lips touched. It was a kiss that tasted of smoke and promise. It was soft at first, a question asked and answered. Then it deepened. Hawk's arm tightened around her waist, lifting her slightly off the ground. Lily's fingers tangled in his long, black hair. Pulling him closer, the kiss went on, a slow exploration. It was the sealing of a covenant. Hawk pulled away just an inch, his forehead resting against hers. His eyes were closed, his breathing heavy. "I have been a ghost for so long," he whispered, walking alone, invisible. He opened his eyes, dark and fierce and vulnerable. "With you, I am solid. I am here." "You are here," Lily confirmed, her voice trembling. "And you are mine, and I am yours." Hawk reached out and touched the side of her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. "Safety," he said, using the word like a prayer. "I never thought I could give it. I never thought I would want it." "You give more than safety, Hawk," Lily said. "You give freedom." He kissed her again, and this time there was urgency in it. He swept her up into his arms, carrying her not to a bed of silk and feathers, but to the pile of furs and blankets they had laid out near the hearth. He laid her down gently, as if she were made of glass. But as he settled over her, bracing his weight on his elbows, Lily pulled him down, showing him that she was not glass, but iron and earth, strong enough to hold him, strong enough to bear the weight of his past and his future. Outside, the wind howled across the prairie, searching for the lonely traveler, but it found no one. The traveler had come inside. He had hung up his rifle. He had closed the door. And in the glow of the fire, under the roof built by 4 hands, the lonely Comanche and the runaway bride found something that the treaties could not give and the guns could not take. They found home. 4 years in the territory did not pass like water. They passed like stone being carved by the wind. They left marks. They changed the shape of things slowly, almost imperceptibly, until one day you looked up and realized the landscape was no longer the same. The cabin by the riverbend had grown. It was no longer just a single room of cottonwood logs and mud chinking. It had expanded, stretching its limbs like the family inside it. There was a lean-to added on the west side for storing winter root vegetables and smoked meat. There was a sturdy corral made of split rail fencing, where the Appaloosa stood alongside a gentle bay mare and a spirited young colt. And there was a porch. It was a wide, shaded veranda facing the river, built by Hawk's own hands, the floorboards smooth from the passage of feet boots, moccasins, and the small, bare feet of children. The summer of 1878 was kind. The rains had come at the right time, turning the strip of land between the river and the high desert into a riot of green. Corn stalks rustled in the breeze, standing tall in neat rows that Lily had planted. Chickens scratched in the dirt near the woodpile, clucking contentedly, while a rooster patrolled the fence line with the arrogance of a cavalry officer. In the yard, the dust kicked up. Not from a gunfight, but from a game of tag. "You cannot catch me, I am the wind." The shout came from a boy of 5 years. He had skin the color of warm sandstone and hair that was a thick, unruly mop of dark brown. His eyes were black, sharp, and intelligent, mirroring the man who watched him from the porch. This was Julian. Chasing him, shrieking with laughter, was a girl of 3. Her hair was jet black, straight and shining like a raven's wing, but her eyes were her father's obsidian, intense, yet currently filled with pure joy. This was Sarah. Lily Hart stood in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. She was thinner than she had been the day she arrived in San Miguel Crossing, her skin browned by the sun and etched with the fine lines of hard work and laughter. She watched her children run. They were the physical manifestation of the bridge she and Hawk had built. In the town, some people still whispered about half-breeds. But out here, under the open sky, they were simply children. They were beautiful, wild, and entirely free. "He's fast," Lily said, stepping onto the porch to stand beside the man who sat on the bench, repairing a bridle. Hawk looked up. The years had been kind to him, too. The sharp, starving edge of his features had softened slightly, replaced by the solid strength of a man who no longer had to sleep with one eye open. He wore a mixture of clothes, white man's trousers and boots, but a Comanche ribbon shirt and the stone necklace of his mother. "He runs like a deer," Hawk agreed, his eyes following the boy. "But she hunts like a cougar. Look." Sarah had stopped chasing. She had crouched low behind the water trough, waiting. When Julian circled back, thinking he was safe, she sprang out, tackling him with a squeal of triumph. They rolled in the dirt, a tangle of limbs and laughter. Hawk smiled. It was a rare expression for the world, but a common one for this porch. "She has your stubbornness and your timing," Lily countered, resting her hand on his shoulder. The sound of hoofbeats approaching from the main road made them both turn. In the old days, 4 years ago, such a sound would have sent Hawk reaching for his Winchester and Lily reaching for the Colt. Now, they simply watched. A wagon was coming up the track. It was driven by a man named Henderson, a rancher from the Northern Valley. He pulled the mules to a halt near the gate and climbed down, holding his left arm gingerly against his chest. "Afternoon, Hawk, Miss Lily," Henderson called out. He looked pale. "The horse kicked me. I think the bone is cracked." Lily was already moving. "Come inside. Mr. Henderson, let's get you to the table." She was no longer just the runaway bride. To the people of the basin, the white settlers, the vaqueros, and even the drifting bands of Comanche who passed through, she was the healer at the river. She had taken her father's books and her own intuition and forged a practice. She set bones, birthed babies, and mixed salves for saddle sores. Henderson sat at the oak table, his face gray with pain. Lily worked quickly, her fingers probing the swelling. "It is a clean break," she pronounced. "I will need to set it. Hawk, I need the splints." Hawk brought the smooth cedar strips he kept ready. He stood by the rancher's shoulder, his presence a calming weight. "This will hurt," Hawk said to Henderson. "Breathe out when she pulls." Henderson nodded, sweat beading on his upper lip. "Just get it done, ma'am," with a quick, practiced motion. Lily set the bone. Henderson let out a yelp that was half curse, half groan. But then he slumped back, the relief immediate. "Thank you," the rancher breathed as Lily bound the arm in linen strips. I don't have silver, Miss Lily, but I brought a side of beef and a sack of late potatoes." "That is more than enough," Lily said, washing her hands in the basin. "Rest a moment. Hawk will help you load the wagon when you are ready." Henderson looked at Hawk. "Obliged, Hawk, and say, I saw some of your mother's people up on the ridge near the canyon. They seemed agitated about the fence line." "I know," Hawk said. "I spoke to them yesterday. They thought your new drift fence cut off the game trail to the water. I showed them the gate you built." "You told them about the gate?" Henderson asked, surprised. "I told them the gate is unlocked," Hawk said evenly. And I told them you leave a steer for them once a month, as rent for the crossing." Henderson chuckled, shaking his head. "You drive a hard bargain, Hawk, but it beats waking up to a burning barn. You keep the peace better than the army ever did." It was true. Hawk had become something he never expected a diplomat. He stood with one foot in the stirrup of the white world and one foot on the ground of the Nirmanu. He translated not just languages, but intentions. He explained deeds and property lines to the elders, and he explained sacred grounds and migration patterns to the ranchers. He did not belong fully to either, but he was essential to both. When Henderson left, leaving the beef and potatoes on the porch, the sun was beginning to dip low, painting the river in shades of copper and gold. Another rider appeared, this one moving slower. It was Sheriff Briggs. The sheriff had aged. His hair was white now, and his belly had softened further, settling over his belt buckle. He rode an old mare that seemed as tired as he was. He did not wear his gun belt tied down anymore. "Coffee pot on?" Briggs asked as he dismounted, groaning slightly at the stiffness in his knees. "Always," Lily called from the kitchen window. Briggs sat on the porch bench next to Hawk. The two men looked out at the river. It was a strange friendship, born of necessity and tempered by time. Briggs had once threatened to hang Hawk. Now, he came here to escape the noise of the town he governed. "Quiet out here," Briggs said, taking the tin cup Lily handed him. "The town's getting loud. More railroad men, more noise." "Progress," Hawk said, the word tasting dry in his mouth. "I suppose," Briggs sighed. "Got a letter from the capital today. Thought you might want to know. Silas Calder is dead." The name hung in the air for a moment, like dust suspended in a sunbeam. Lily stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on a cloth. "Dead. Stroke," Briggs said. "Died in a boarding house in Austin. Alone. From what I hear, lost the last of his fortune trying to sue the railroad for breach of contract. They say he was shouting at the walls when he went." Hawk looked at his hands. He felt no triumph. He felt no joy. He only felt a quiet sense of closure, like a book being closed and placed on a high shelf. "He wanted to own the earth," Hawk said quietly. "Now the earth owns him." "Irony is a cruel judge," Briggs agreed. He sipped his coffee. "But because of what you folks did, because of that trial, the Sweetwater is still open. The railroad had to route south. The valley is safe, at least for now." "For now is all we have," Lily said. She looked at her children, who were now feeding the chickens, scattering corn with wild, sweeping gestures. "You built a good life here," Briggs said, standing up to leave. He looked at Hawk. "I used to worry about you. Hawk, thought you were a savage. Shows what I know. You're more civilized than half the men I arrest on Saturday nights." "Civilization is just a set of rules," Hawk said. "We made our own rules." When the sheriff rode away, the twilight was deepening. The cicadas began their evening chorus, a rising hum that vibrated in the air. Hawk stood up and walked to the door of the cabin. He reached up and touched a piece of wood that was nailed to the header, right above the entrance. It was a simple plank of planed oak. The letters burned into it with a hot iron. Where bread was offered, a home was born. Lily came up beside him, wrapping her arm around his waist. She followed his gaze to the sign. "Do you remember?" she asked softly. "The smell of that bakery." "I remember the smell of your fear," Hawk said, turning to look at her. "And the look in your eyes. You were hungry, but you were proud." "I was lost," Lily said. "I thought my life was over. I thought I was just a piece of currency to be traded for a debt." She looked out at the yard, where Julian was trying to show Sarah how to hold a stick like a bow. The golden light bathed them in a halo. "I used to think freedom belonged to no one," Lily said, her voice thick with the memory of that lonely road. "I thought it meant running away, having no name, no ties, but watching them, watching you. Now I see that freedom is different. Freedom is being able to choose the place where you belong." Hawk nodded slowly. He understood. He had spent his youth running from the forts, running from the schools, running from the sadness of his people. He had thought that being alone on the high plains, answering to no chief and no captain, was the ultimate liberty. "And I," Hawk replied, his voice deep and resonant in the quiet evening. "I used to think freedom was outside the reach of everyone. I thought it was a mountain no one else could climb. But now I see freedom can also be found in the arms of the right person." He pulled her closer. "We are free, Lily, not because we ran away, but because we stopped running." The night settled in. The stars began to puncture the indigo canopy of the sky, one by one, until the heavens were awash in silver light. It was the vast, indifferent sky of the West, the same sky that looked down on wars and massacres, on fences and railroads. But down here, in the small circle of light spilling from the cabin windows, the indifference of the universe did not matter. They put the children to bed in the loft, tucking them under quilts sewn from scraps of calico and buckskin. Hawk told them a story in the Comanche tongue, a story about a coyote who fell in love with a star, while Lily smoothed their hair. When the house was quiet, Hawk and Lily went back to the main room. The fire in the hearth had burned down to glowing embers, casting a soft, pulsing red light across the floorboards. The wind from the grasslands blew through the open window, carrying the scent of cooling sage and distant rain. It was a wild scent, but inside, the air smelled of dried herbs, wood smoke, and soap. Hawk sat on the rug before the fire, pulling Lily down with him. She settled between his legs, her back against his chest, his arms wrapping around her like a protective wall. "Are you happy?" Hawk asked, his lips brushing her ear. "I am home," Lily answered. She turned in his arms, facing him. She unbuttoned the top of his shirt, sliding her hand inside to rest over his heart. She could feel the steady, powerful beat of it, the drum of a warrior who had laid down his spear to build a cradle. "4 years," she whispered, "and I still feel my heart race when you look at me." "Good," Hawk growled softly, a playful light in his eyes. "If it stops racing, I will have to do something to start it again." He kissed her then. It was not the desperate, frantic kiss of two people trying to survive a storm. It was the deep, languid kiss of two people who knew they had survived. It was a kiss of possession and of surrender. His hands moved over her, familiar with every curve, every scar, every softness. Lily arched into him, the heat of the fire matched by the heat rising in her blood. The rough calluses on his palms against her skin were a reminder of the work they had done to build this life, and the strength that held it together. They did not need words. Their love was written in the silence, in the breath shared, in the way their bodies moved together in the flickering light. It was a love that was both sexy and sacred, grounded in the earth and reaching for the sky. Outside, the world was still harsh. There were still injustices. The railroad was still coming, eating the land mile by mile. The old ways were fading, ghosts dancing into the mist. But here, in this house built on the edge of two worlds, something new had been forged. It was a testament that even in the violent, dusty history of the West, where land was stolen and blood was spilled, there was still room for a story about bread, about kindness, and about two lonely people who found a freedom that would outlast every gun ever drawn. Under the vast western stars, the lonely Comanche and his hungry bride slept in each other's arms, dreaming the same dream. Thank you for listening to this story from the dusty trails of the past. If this tale of Hawk and Lily touched your heart, or if you felt the heat of the desert sun and the warmth of their fire, please let me know. I would love to hear where you are listening from. Are you in a bustling city, dreaming of open plains? Or in a quiet corner of the world seeking adventure? Please leave a comment below to share your thoughts and connect with others. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, Wild West Tales. Hit that like button and give us a hype to help this story ride the algorithm winds and reach more listeners. Your support keeps the campfire burning. Safe travels, partners.